Today, I'd like to ask a question I've struggled with my whole life, and I would imagine many of you have too. And that is why, if Jesus taught love, are there so many mean Christians? That's a question I've asked since I was a little boy. I remember in Sunday school, we had a teacher whose big focus was the question whether people who've been divorced should be teaching in the church. And as cruel as that seemed at the time, I've heard so many other kinds of almost predatorial Christianity. Up the Texas Capitol, almost, I don't know how many nights of my life have been wasted trying to protect people from this predatory Christianity that goes after gays and lesbians or women or Muslims or anybody that can be used as a scapegoat to rally the troops. Some years back, Ronald Reagan was president, and there was a kind of a nationalizing of that bad habit of equating Christianity with everything good. And Reagan said, if we ever forget that we're one nation under God, we are a nation sure to go under. He said something like that. And that idea of being a Christian nation has a really bloody history going back through the centuries and centuries. But you don't have to go back very far at all to hear that kind of again, predatory Christianity. Back when the Right to Life movement was particularly violent and people were getting shot, and there was vandalism and this sort of thing in reproductive clinics. Randall Terry would go around the nation trying to stir up hatred in the name of Christ. This is one quote from him. He said, "I want you to just let a wave of intolerance wash over you. I want you to let a wave of hatred wash over you. Yes, hate is good. Our goal is a Christian nation. We have a biblical duty. We are called by God to conquer this country. We don't want equal time. We don't want pluralism." Now this, if it had been said by someone of another religion in another nation, would be seen as a terroristic threat. And that circle gets smaller and smaller when you organize around excluding people. When you're more concerned that the wrong people might get in than might be left behind, that circle gets smaller and smaller. Another quote that doesn't go that far back is by Pat Robertson. He says, "You say we're supposed to be nice. You're supposed to be nice to the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians and the Methodists, and this and that and the other thing. Nonsense. I don't have to be nice to the spirit of the Antichrist. I can love the people who hold false opinions, but I don't have to be nice to them." So that idea of love that carries a spanking with it is something we need to explore, because Christianity has a problem. Historically, there's something wrong in how this religion has been put together that needs to be eliminated as best as humanly possible. Bishop Tutu is a loving Christian, South Africa bishop, but he was very aware that the white evangelicals were a huge part of the racism of that country. And he said, it was Christians, not pagans, who were responsible for the Holocaust. It was Christians, not pagans, who lynched people here in the South, who burned people at the stake, frequently in the name of this Jesus Christ. Now, nobody loves Christianity more than Bishop Tutu, but he loves it enough to try to challenge and change this hatefulness that's hidden in Christian theology over the centuries. Will Durant wrote a history of the world. And one of the places when he says when Constantinople became Christian, when the Roman Empire became Christian, in 2 years between 342 and 343, more Christians were killed by other Christians that had been persecuted by pagans in the entire history of the Roman Empire. That should tell us there's something that we need to pull out. There's a thorn in the eye that needs to go. Excuse me. Now, I want to hold a scale here because if you Google me at all, if you've ever done that in the past, you've probably seen critics who say that I am a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I think it's important to realize there are two versions of Christianity, at least. And I didn't get this idea on my own. When I got to college, I ran across a passage by Albert Schweitzer, which really changed my idea of what Christianity needs to be. He said there are two groups that call themselves Christian. One is people that base their lives on the Sermon on the Mount, on the actual teachings of Jesus. And then all the others are the 10,000 versions of Christianity where people sort of worship their ideas of Jesus. So what we're going to be talking about today is what would it mean if we could move the Sermon on the Mount back to the center of Christianity, back to the living heart of the religion, so that kindness is the emphasis. And we're looking at a passage by Jesus that is very critical of the church. The church hasn't come along yet, but it doesn't take too much genius to realize that these are human traits and they are problems that we just sort of drift towards. This is the Message translation of our passage today. Be wary of false preachers who smile a lot, dripping with practiced sincerity. Chances are they are out to rip you off in some way or other. Don't be impressed with charisma. Look for character. Who preachers are is the main thing, not what they say. A genuine leader will never exploit your emotions or your pocketbook. These diseased trees with their bad apples are going to be chopped down and burned. Now, what's interesting is that last verse isn't really there in the Greek, and it shows you that we can all be wolves in sheep's clothing. This is the warning I think that Jesus is giving. It's not that there's one group that permanently does that, but because we're human, we're trying to be loving, we're trying to be kind, but when we get frustrated and angry, sometimes the attempts to appear kind and pious can make us even meaner. I remember when my dad and mom were very polite people. And sometimes when they fought, that politeness made them more frustrated. I remember one time my dad was angry at my mother, and I'll never forget the phrase. He said, "Honey, you're being stupid." And I thought that juxtaposition of the wool of the sheep on the outside and the anger of the wolf on the inside was maybe what Jesus is talking about. That we have to remember that all of us are human and that any of us can get so frustrated that we become dangerous to someone else. And sometimes our efforts to be kind, not just religion, but our efforts to be kind and respectable can become disguises for our true motives. But we're focused on Christianity today. So the point I want to make to start with is that whereas Jesus taught love, the church has often taught theology. Where Jesus taught love, the church has often taught moralism or dogma or rituals. That what we're trying to do is get back to the heart of Christianity as we find it in the Sermon on the Mount. I personally believe, I mean, who knows who's right, who's wrong, but it seems really clear to me that Jesus should get a vote on what Christianity means. And if we do give Jesus a vote, I think the dilemma is over. Jesus taught not to judge. He taught kindness. He taught sharing. He taught all of those things. And they should be non-negotiable in Christianity. We used to sing a song around the campfire that went, "They will know we are Christians by our love." And that's literally a quote from Scripture, that this is how people will know you're my disciples, that you love. When the rich young ruler came to Jesus and asked about how to be saved, how he could be perfect, Jesus didn't say, well, learn the Apostles' Creed, praise me, pray to me, get baptized. None of that. He said, you need to leave your power and domination over other people. You need to give up your power, your wealth, that makes other people miserable. That message has been taken out of Christianity, and not by accident. That when Christianity was accepted into the Roman Empire, it was transformed from this call that included ethics to something that was simply escapist dogma. The kind of Jesus, love that Jesus is talking about, it doesn't belong to the church. This is something you find all over the world. And Jesus wasn't claiming a copyright on love, but he was calling everyone to that. When he says that his is the only way, I think that's what he's talking about, that love is the only way. I don't think anybody who is sane and not frightened could ever say that the church has been perfect. And there are many, many loving people who have never, ever stepped inside a church in their whole life. And I think they're as close to what Jesus is talking about sometimes as anybody in the church. As we've said over the years, a loving atheist is much, much closer to the Sermon on the Mount than a hateful theologian. So we have to realize that we are called to love universally. But that kind of love makes people angry. A lot of times when you stand up for other people, as we're called to do, people in the church say, don't be divisive. And by don't be divisive, they mean don't bring up our white supremacy. Don't bring up our patriarchal viewpoints. Don't lift up the people that we are oppressing. Let's all be one. And we have to realize that everybody's included in this love that Jesus is teaching. Christians, non-Christians, equally. That this isn't about us taking over. It's about losing that idea of us versus them. So Christianity, when it was politicized, first it was apoliticized. Jesus was a very political person. When he goes to Jerusalem, when he does his civil disobedience, those are political acts. When he's executed by the Roman Empire, which didn't really care about religion that much, but they called him King of the Jews, that meant they thought he was a revolutionary. And they probably knew more about it than a lot of the televangelists do. Jesus' idea of love threatens oppression, it threatens power, it threatens domination, and it calls us out of that. I love a quote by Geraldine Ferraro from years back. She said, the Republicans love to say that the Democratic Party is ruled by special interests. But when pressed to name those special interests, the usual reply is women, blacks, teachers, and unions. Those are special interests to be proud of because together they comprise the majority of Americans. What about the special interests that dominate the Republican Party? The oil companies, the banks, the gun lobby, and the apostles of all religious intolerance. I don't think Jesus would have been Republican or Democrat permanently, but I think at a time when the parties are standing for such different things, that Jesus would be able to distinguish, but also go beyond either one. That neither party stands up for the whole world the poor, the weak, all of that. So we have political choices to make, and we need to have discernment to not cooperate in oppressive movements. But we also have to go beyond the partisan. We have to realize that the answer is universal human rights. And unfortunately, that seems very divisive to people. But that's the kind of love that Jesus is calling us to, in my understanding. That you don't have to learn Greek and Hebrew to understand Jesus. You just have to love. You don't have to go on a crusade of purging the world of moral evil. You just have to love. You don't have to take over America on Jesus' behalf. You just have to love. So when we say the question, when we ask the question, why, if Jesus taught love, are there so many mean Christians? I think it's a question that Jesus is asking us in the Sermon on the Mount. And he answered some very, I think, direct answers. That any one of us can become angry and frustrated, and our religion can become a disguise, like a sheep hiding behind a lamb's garment. From the outside, you can't say. They're two, I think Schweitzer's absolutely right. There are two completely different approaches that call themselves Christian. One is the people that live by the Sermon on the Mount, and the other is all the other versions that have replacements for love and for what Jesus taught. When we sang as children that campfire song, they will know we are Christians by our love. I think we return to that heart. When we say those words, we feel ourselves going home, moving closer to who we are. So when we look at the chaos and the struggle of the church, and we see the cruelty and ignorance and superstition, first of all, we have to realize that we're not a different species, that we too can become wolves in sheep's clothing. But the way home is very clear. We have to return the Sermon on the Mount to its rightful place as the living heart of Christianity. I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.